Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Maddie Zeller, and I'm a freshman here at the University of Kansas studying business management and leadership. I am proud to serve as a member of the Dole Institute's Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. My new involvement at the Dole Institute has opened the doors to participate in civic engagement, as well as opportunities to educate myself on local, state, and national politics. This experience has encouraged me to pursue a career in public service, more specifically working in city management. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members can access many great opportunities through their involvement with the Institute, including volunteering at programs and networking with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please email us at dolesab@ku.edu or speak with a student worker after the program. A video of today's program will be available on our YouTube channel. You can also access videos of past programs by visiting our YouTube channel. A loop hearing system is available to use if you have a T-coil hearing aid. We also have a limited number of listening devices. If you have questions about the loop system, or if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you are able and ask just one brief question. If you are a part of our virtual audience, you may submit your questions to dolequestions@ku.edu. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like you to please turn off your cell phones. Now please join me in welcoming Senior Associate Director, Dr. Barbara Ballard.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. We want to thank you for joining us for the presentation of the 2024 Dole Leadership Prize, honoring the life and the legacy of Sandra Day O'Connor. Before we begin tonight's discussion, I'd like to direct you to the back of your program, please. And we just want to freshen your memory a little bit. Next Tuesday, October the 29th at 10 a.m., please join us for this season's program in partnership with the Bipartisan Policy Center, How to Make Congress Work for the American People. Then on Wednesday the 30th at 4 p.m., for the continuation of this season's discussion group series, Congress in the 21st Century. Finally, please join us on Wednesday, November the 6th. Now that's the big day after the big election. At 3 p.m. for the continuation of the Fort Leavenworth series, which is presented in partnership with the U.S. Command Staff and General College's Department of Military History at Fort Leavenworth. At this point, though, I would like to just talk a little bit about two students that we're going to recognize this evening. And it is the Robert Hemingway Public Service Award. And we have also made the Hemingway leadership team as well. When Robert Hemingway retired, Senator Dole and his family wanted to recognize Chancellor Hemingway. And this is a description that we came up with in order to honor him. The Dole Institute of Politics established the Robert Hemingway Public Service Award in May of 2009 in honor of the 16th Chancellor of the University of Kansas upon his retirement. The award is given annually to a KU junior student who has demonstrated a commitment to making a difference for KU students and furthering the idea of service on campus and within the community. The overriding criteria for this award is commitment to public service with demonstrated leadership. When we established over 3 years ago the leadership team, is because we had outstanding students and we wanted to be able to pull them together on the Civic Engagement Leadership Council and at the same time have them work together. So Not only did we choose the recipient of the Hemingway Award, but we also chose the outstanding finalist as well. And this evening, I want to acknowledge 3 people. One was not able to be with us this evening because she's out of town, but I will introduce the 2 that we have this evening. And I'll start with Bridger Scott, and I will ask him to stand. Well, you might as well come this way too, so you'll have your back to anyone, all right? And he will talk to me about that later. But Bridger Scott, he's from Lee's Summit, Missouri. He came here in 2023. He is pre-law in political science and communications. He's also a sophomore. He plans to graduate in 2027. He wants to be an attorney, and potentially he'd like to serve in the political arena, and he wants to be a legislator, and as I said earlier, I recommend it highly, okay? So if we look at his organizations, it's Alpha Sigma Phi, Mock Trial, Student Senate, College Republican, and also the KU Leadership and Engagement Council as well. He is also a retired United States Marine. Wow, there you go. All right. They also had to write an essay, 250 words or less, and I'll just highlight the things I want to read about him. He would like to be a public defender, and part of a public defender contributes so much in defending marginalized communities who would otherwise not be able to afford proper representation. I believe that all of these people in succession through their public service impact the broader community and campus in more ways than we could ever understand. Without their help, we would have members in our community who would be lost, broken, and largely forgotten about, which is why public service is so impactful in our great society on campus. He also states, I believe in America, I believe in unity, and love through public service. I present to you Bridger Scott. You can be seated. Ben Rosie Kim Pumbudi is from Junction City. She's not with us this evening. Her major is political science and intelligence and national security leadership engagement. She expects to graduate in 2025, and she would like to complete her degree and work within community engagement and local politics and go to officer candidate school. Before starting university, this is part of her essay, I thought civic engagement was primarily for older adults, with college students expected to observe, study, and wait for their turn. However, my experience with the KU Leadership Engagement Council taught me that once we are eligible to vote, we must take advantage of that right to express our opinion every year. She says, I consider civic engagement to have deep root not only within politics, but as using your voice to address concerns within your community. Give a little applause for Ms. Kamputi. And the recipient of the Robert Hemingway Public Service Award is Sadie Stouser. Please stand. Thank you, Maddie. Maddie is from Lansing, Kansas. She came here in 2021, and she will graduate. I said hope to grade. She will graduate in 2025, political science and environmental studies. She would like to go to law school and also get a Master of Public Administration. She has only a few of the things I'm going to tell you about because there are many. Undergraduate mock trial team, she was a team captain. Student ambassador for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. KU Young Democrats, KU Honor Roll, Jayhawk Scholarship, other activities, constituent services intern for a whole year for Governor Laura Kelly. She was also a Kansas legislative intern for Representative Mary Lynn Poskin in Johnson County. and she also works as a student assistant for KU Housing. For her essay, I would simply say, public service is the lifeline of a community. Public servants bridge the needs of their community to create direct action from governing bodies and administration. More than anything, public servants are the first people to recognize trends in the issues within their communities. Public service doesn't just take the form of government action. It can also be addressing specific needs within the community to support their success. Public service is essential to KU. The University of Kansas continues to thrive because of its focus on public service for the success of the community. Please recognize Maddie Saucer. And I would also like to recognize her clapping mother and dad. Would you please stand, Christine and Bill Saucer. Thank you, and may I ask Bridger to stand again? Maddie to stand again. Please recognize our outstanding students. Thank you. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's program. The Dole Leadership Prize is a bipartisan award presented to an individual or a nonprofit whose public service leadership demonstrates the importance of and inspires others to be engaged in political and civic engagement. This year, the Dole Institute is proud to honor Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female to serve on the United States Supreme Court and founder of the educational nonprofits civics. This also marks the first time the Institute has honored a recipient posthumously. Joining Director Audrey Coleman for a discussion on her immense life and legacy is Scott O'Connor, the eldest son of Sandra Day O'Connor. Scott spent over 40 years in the commercial real estate industry in various capacities. Following the examples set by his parents, he entered public service as a city councilman and as a planning and zoning commissioner. He also served as the legislative chairperson for the Arizona GOP from 2013 to 2015. Scott holds a degree in industrial engineering from Stanford University and now works with his wife, Joni, in operating a small business. Actually, when you think about it, the apple does not fall too far from the tree. And it's a pleasure to recognize Sandra Day O'Connor this evening, and I would like you to please welcome Audrey Coleman and Scott O'Connor.
By Senator Bob Dole. She came to the national stage at that time. Could you please kind of put us in that spot chronologically?
When Potter Stewart announced at the end of the 1981 term that he had retired and expected that the president would be able to fill his seat by the first Monday in October, I'm sorry, he didn't make that announcement at the end of the term, but prior to the end of the term, so the president would have some time. President Reagan had made a campaign commitment that if he had the opportunity of filling a Supreme Court vacancy, if he could find a qualified woman, he would appoint one. And my dad recognized that this might be the opportunity for Mom to be struck by lightning and began calling on his entire network to see if there's any way the Attorney General might get Mom's resume on his desk. to potentially be on the list. And with the benefit of hindsight, and especially from the research that Mom's biographer, Evan Thomas, put into this, the common thread in the story, I'll get to the punchline because it's so wonderful, is that everybody that Dad asked to call their connection in the Reagan administration said, "We've already heard about her. She's on the list. Please stop calling." So the system worked, and I was 2 years out of college at the time, and on July 7th, when it all happened, and he made the phone call asking if Mom would take the job, and she said she would, and it became public that day. I was just so proud that America worked, the American dream worked, and that anybody could reach the highest echelons of American government if they were qualified and passionate for the work, and it could be discovered. And all of that happened, to a little ranch girl, from the middle of nowhere that entered college at age 16. It was just astonishing. So it gave our family, great hope for America that it works.
Well, at the time, there was a lot of conversation about whether or not she was qualified. What does the qualification look like? And it's interesting to note that she was the most qualified justice in 24 years. She had the first justice nominee to have state court experience in 24 years, and then in 32 years with lawmaking experience as well. So she had an immense wealth of practical experience. Will you tell us a little bit about her early career that maybe we don't know anything about?
Well, let me first take a look at where we are today. The process has evolved where it appears that no president dare nominate anyone with real-world experience like she had. Branding calves, driving the Roundup chuck wagon out to meet the cowboys. That's real-world experience. No, I'm kind of kidding about that, but she had this incredible career where she had been in all three branches of Arizona state government, found her way into leadership positions everywhere she went, had all that practical experience, had traveled extensively internationally, knew a bit about the world. All the nominees today have come through a cloistered existence in the federal judiciary. They don't have that kind of experience. They don't know what it's like to pass a bill that's controversial. They don't know what it's like to run for public office. They don't know necessarily what it's like to represent the poorest indigent client in a strip mall law office, with your sign hung out over the sidewalk. That's missing on the court. I think the court needs a more diverse set of experiences where their jurisprudence will have a better understanding of what the rest of America endures when they make those decisions.
You mentioned her early years on the family ranch. What came next for her after she went to school and she left home to go to school? Is that right?
She entered Stanford, as I said, at the age of 16. She graduated out of high school in 3 years, whizzed through that, and was just 16. She found a boyfriend right away. This was in 1946. The war had just ended. The GI Bill had passed, and the GIs arriving at Stanford University, had tuition covered by the GI Bill, and all had a little bit of money from their military service. And there was a handsome young man who had a bright red convertible, and that got Mom's attention, and they dated for a while. And he was in his late 80s or early 90s when my dad had passed away, and he came to court Mom again from Pasadena. His wife had passed away. He had one son. His name was Andy Campbell, and he had Andrew Campbell Jr. would drive him from Pasadena to Phoenix, and he would take Mom on dates. And Mom played hard to get. But Andy had the gleam in his eye and was one of 4 or 5, I've lost count, 4 or 5 of her Stanford beaux that had proposed.
Wow.
One of whom we discovered, much to our surprise and delight, was Bill Rehnquist, who became Mom's Chief Justice partner on the court. But Dad Dad was the one she picked. He was the right guy, and he was a wonderful father, a wonderful husband, and a great partner and fan of Mom. So. But there she was at Stanford. She had some terrific faculty, one of whom, I have to think of his name. It's escaping me right now. But he taught undergraduates and he taught at the law school. And he had students talking about all the great issues of life, the mysteries of life. Why are we here, and what do we do with ourselves? And he just inspired her so much that she decided, if that's what lawyers get to think about, and it's not just dry cases, I like this, I'm going to enroll in the law school. So at the time, it was available for bright, promising students to kind of dual degree. You could start your law school work before you'd gotten your undergraduate diploma. So she was out of Stanford with her law degree at 21.
Wow.
Graduated a year ahead of my dad because of that early admission. One of her other faculty was Wallace Stegner, the great author, who wrote, I'll get checked up. He wrote novels about the West. And when Mom wrote her first book that became a bestseller, all the chapters had the chapter title and then a Wallace Stegner quote in italics, and then she'd get into the text. And he taught her creative writing.
Oh, wow.
So she had a marvelous experience there, got her law degree. The great story was, with her law degree, Dad had a year to go. She's out in the job market to get a job as a lawyer. No law firms would hire. She ended up going to work for free at the San Mateo County Attorney's Office at a desk she shared with a secretary, and no pay. And eventually the county attorney was so embarrassed because she was working so hard and doing so much that he eventually got some small stipend for her, but she spent that year while Dad was finishing up in that job. Last year, just prior to Mom's passing, one of her former law clerks, who is now, many of her law clerks went on to become federal judges, but not another attorney, a county attorney in San Mateo County was doing some research, and he went into old archival storage files. He found Mom's personnel file, and he found the 5-page letter she typed herself applying for that job. It was hysterical in its earnestness and all of her qualifications. And so at Mom's memorial in Washington, D.C., when all her law clerks were gathered at the court, she read this letter to all the other clerks about, because they all had to interview to get jobs with her to be her clerks, and they were getting to read her application to get a job with a county attorney in 1952, when nobody would hire a woman lawyer. It was just fantastic.
Yeah.
It's been published in Stanford Law Magazine because
Yeah.
it's such a great letter.
It's striking that, even 30 years later, she's still being tested on her qualifications as the same place where she started her career as a woman.
She talked about her typing skills and all this stuff, that she worked really hard, and other jobs she had held, including being a cowgirl.
Well, go ahead.
Dad got his law degree the following year. It was 1953, and the Korean conflict was still underway, and Dad was afraid he might be drafted. So he applied to the JAG Corps, the U.S. Army's legal team, and they took him, and he got first in the class. And so they said, you get to pick anywhere you want. Where would you like to go? And he thought post-war Europe sounded pretty good, so he got stationed at Frankfurt, Germany, and did his 3-year stint there. Mom, with her law degree, entered public service for the second time. She got a job as a civilian attorney for the Quartermaster Corps. And so they were dinks, dual income, no kids, in post-war Germany, where a dollar went a long way. They saved so much money that they lived the year after Dad finished his service in Kitzbühel, Austria, learning to ski and play tennis and traveling around. They bought a container full of mid-century modern furniture, which was the thing then, in Copenhagen, that they shipped back to the States after they came home. I think I ended up being the reason they came home because Mom was very pregnant with me and they wanted me born in the U.S.
That was going to be my next question. What prompted them to come back after this wonderful life in Germany?
And so on the career choice thing, this is again Dad being a great partner. They went first to the ranch because they'd been away for so long to be with Mom's parents, who were so great, M-O-N-D-A, we called them. And after leaving the ranch, they got in the little black Volkswagen Beetle they had purchased in Berlin and started driving towards Phoenix. And they got in a big argument about where were they going to settle. Dad was from San Francisco, so Mom wanted to live there. Great city, near Stanford. They had lots of friends in the area. Dad said, we're headed to Phoenix right now. It's a boom town. We could be something there. Whereas in San Francisco, you know, it's closed society, high society, all that. We might never amount to anything. Dad won the argument. So he got a job with a law firm in Phoenix, and she had to hang out a shingle because no firm would hire her. And it went from there.
How long was she in private practice before she ran for the state legislature?
Well, it was, I want to say she did that for about three years or so. And then a very interesting man became the state attorney general who was willing to hire women to work in the state attorney's office. And she did that, but she did something innovative because my younger brother Brian, there were now two of us, came along, and she was starting to have to juggle that a little bit more. You know, there weren't a lot of working moms in the day, and so you had to innovate more. So she and another lady lawyer each worked 3/4 time for half pay. That's the deal they made with him. That wouldn't be legal today. But she did that for several years, and then my youngest brother Jay was born, and she took a short time out. But then there was a woman in the Arizona State Senate who was appointed by Richard Nixon to the National Transportation Safety Board because she had passed a motorcycle helmet law in Arizona. And Mom had been working as a volunteer in the Republican Party and was remembered for her work at the Attorney General's office. And she was active, you know, as a precinct committeeman and all that. And in the same district. So they said, why don't we nominate Sandra O'Connor to take Isabel Burgess's seat in the state Senate? And that's when her career really started to take shape.
Well, and she became, as I understand it, the first woman majority leader of any state house, state house at all. Yeah. What did she think about the political arena? Did she feel at home there?
She enjoyed the work. It was extremely challenging. But she soon realized that the typical state legislator wasn't necessarily the most ethical, most high-minded person you might want to spend the rest of your career with. She started thinking the grass was greener on the other side of the fence in the judiciary. So she decided after 2.5 terms in the state Senate and at the time Arizona was still electing judges. But Mom recognized, like Kansas had, that merit selection was the way to go. And one of her final legislative accomplishments was getting a merit selection plan passed by the state legislature and onto the ballot for the voters to decide were we going to switch to that system. So when she ran for election to the Superior Court in 1974, I had to put up her campaign signs in all of Maricopa County, which is geographically one of the largest counties in the U.S. And I did a lot of driving in the family station wagon with a gasoline-powered post hole digger and one of my
Probably
friends from swim
pay.
team. For no pay. Yeah. And one night it was dark and we were leaving a parking lot and the signs were so big that the tailgate on the station wagon was down and I backed it into a light pole. So I got in trouble. I had to earn the money to pay for the car repair. But we still have one of those campaign signs in the garage at our home.
Oh, wow.
But she got elected, and merit selection passed, and so ironically, she had to run for election, you know, and just missed the system that she put into place.
And so was that the position that she held immediately previously to her nomination on the Supreme Court?
I think, let's see, that would have been from 74 to 78, so about 4 years as a trial court judge, and then Governor Bruce Babbitt, through merit selection, appointed her to the State Court of Appeals. We believe to put her on ice where she'd be less tempted to challenge him for the governor's office at the next election. because she was being recruited by all her former Senate colleagues to do that.
How long was the nomination process between nomination and confirmation? And Sheila Bear's out here in the office, or in the audience, she would be able to say.
So her name came to light in July 7th, 1981. And my dad had been telling my brothers and I that this was in the works and it was happening. And Kenneth Starr of the blue dress and the Whitewater investigation, he was a senior attorney in William French Smith's Attorney General's office in Washington, Reagan's first Attorney General. And so they sent Kenneth Starr out to interview Mom in our living room. And so we say that he wrote the memo to get Mom the job. He decided that Kenneth Starr talked his boss, William French Smith, into granting the interview. And French Smith's law firm in Los Angeles that he left to become Attorney General was one of the firms that turned Mom down, but offered her a job as a legal secretary coming out of Stanford. So during the interview, she got to really twist the knife.
I bet she really enjoyed that.
She enjoyed that. Later, after several years after being on the court, she was invited to speak at their firm's annual meeting, and this is a big international firm with like 1,000 lawyers, so she got to ham it up a little bit in that speech with the firm. Here I am again.
Right. So, what was the dynamic like when she first got on the court among the justices? Did she tell stories, or did she let you into that part of her experience professionally?
She was always 100% connected with us all the time, totally engaging, cooking meals, all that kind of stuff. But as soon as she got nominated, she hunkered down to learn what she could about federal cases. She was a state court judge. She never had to decide federal issues. And that's what she would be asked about in confirmation. So she had to do a crash course between July and late September on all the questions that the Justice Department, coaching, suggested that she'd be asked. One of her coaches, by the way, was a then young Justice Department attorney named John Roberts, who became the Chief Justice while she was still on the court trying to retire.
Did she ever discuss cases at home with you all?
I would harangue her about pending cases that involved the real estate industry that I was in, takings cases. And she would play hard to get. She would never, whether it was real estate or any other case, she would never let on, what they were going to decide. Sometimes she would kind of frame issues, but wouldn't give a hint where she was going. So I'd have to wait until after the opinion came down, and I'd say, boy, did you guys blow that. And here you go again, with such a narrow ruling that you've solved the one case, but everybody else that has a similar issue is still going to have to go litigate because you didn't make a broad enough decision that solves the other similar cases. Oh, I would get on her.
She'd push back on you.
I would get on her for that over and over again. But she said, now we have to move in small steps. We can't be smashing, walls all the time. Have patience.
So over the course of her career on the bench, she wrote over 645 opinions during 24 years in the Supreme Court. And she had an interesting relationship. She got the reputation for being the swing voter. People would say she's the swing vote.
She didn't like being called a swing voter because that made it seem like she would go whichever way the wind blows rather than on, the facts of the case. That bothered her. And she didn't like the court being called the O'Connor Court when her good friend Bill Rehnquist was the Chief Justice, and she agreed with him most of the time. And he deserved to be. Should have been called the Rehnquist Court, but some media pundits like to call it the O'Connor Court because she tended to form the consensus, for so many of the split decisions.
Are there any specific cases or dynamics that you feel exemplify her service on the court?
She used to say, and I agree, the cases tend to speak for themselves. It's the only branch of our government where it's all done in writing, and it's all there for anyone to read, including all the rationale for how they voted the way they voted. When you vote in Congress, you don't have to explain your vote. On the court, it's all there. So she would make her decisions and move on, and she would tell people all the time, do the best you can, make your decision, move on, don't look back, burning energy looking back when you need to put that energy into the next assignment. So that's kind of how she was. One case I do like to mention was in 1996. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had been on the court 3 years after a long career with the ACLU fighting gender discrimination cases. And so they got the case from Virginia Military Institute, which was the only military institute remaining that had government funding that was single sex. So women who wanted to attend VMI were the plaintiffs. And in the conference, after oral argument, the Chief Justice wasn't sure he was going to go along with the majority. Mom was the senior justice in the majority, so she got the opinion writing assignment. And she told her colleagues that it really should be Ruth writing this opinion. And with a big majority like that, it was going to be, it ended up being 7-1 because there was a recusal. It would have been a home run for Mom, but she said, this really should be Ruth's. I'd like Ruth to write the opinion. And my brothers and I were at an event that the Reagan Institute hosted in Washington a few years ago, and Ruth was still living and was on stage doing an interview with Ted Olson, who had been a U.S. Solicitor General, and he asked her about that. And he said, was that typical? Is that a normal thing to do? And she says, no, it never happened at the court. Nobody ever gave away a plum writing assignment, ever. That was Sandra. She knew how important that was to me, and that's how generous she was. She did that gesture of letting me write it. That's one of my favorite stories.
Did she ever share with you feelings about, or her experience, perception of how the court changed within her own career?
Mostly, it didn't change so much with the abortion cases, which were like the big dreaded ones that they wish they didn't have to deal with. She got more mail than any other justice, first when she went on the court, and then preceding the abortion cases. She got mail bags full every day for months on those things. And those were tough, but the one that changed the court was Bush v. Gore, because it was hated. You know, it was like the abortion cases in that the nation was so evenly divided on how they wished that case had been decided. And so nobody was going to like the rationale no matter what they did. It was a joint opinion. It wasn't authored by a single justice. That was Mom's design, and she had done the same thing with groups of justices on the abortion cases. She didn't think it was fair that any one of them had to suffer all the ire of the side that felt they had been disappointed by the outcome. So like in the Casey decision, there were 3 justices writing for the majority opinion. And the same thing happened with Bush v. Gore. And you know, in hindsight, she said she wished the court hadn't been forced to take it, but we would talk for hours sometimes about all the what-if scenarios if they hadn't, none of which were pleasant. There were very plausible scenarios that George W. Bush's brother Jeb, who was governor of Florida, would have ended up in a position of being the decider because of how the Florida legislature's role would have played out. He would have been the decider of whether his brother got to serve as president or not. I mean, that's not a pretty picture. So they felt it was the court's obligation, plus with the timeline. Somebody has to take office in January. They didn't have a year to go think about it and wait till they, got to the end of their regular term. So it was pressure packed.
With all of you mentioned the correspondence that she would receive. Did she read that correspondence? Did she digest that, or was that something that she just kind of kept
When she
out?
first went on the court, she was a sensation. Tens of thousands of letters. She responded to every single one during the first 2 years. She got through all of it. Everybody got a letter back.
Wow.
I'm not very good at thank you notes. She's the world champion.
Were there any particular justice that she had a close relationship with on the court?
Close in different ways. Close philosophically, close socially, close as a colleague. She rarely voted the same as Clarence Thomas, but she drew him into the fold after his brutal confirmation process. And he had not been thinking he'd be inclined to join the other justices for lunch. And she brought him in. Thurgood Marshall had fallen away from doing the justices' lunches together. She brought him back in, and they ended up being great friends. And she was always begging him for another story, and he had thousands of stories. What a career he had, with the NAACP cases before Brown versus Board of Education at the Supreme Court.
Did she have any reservations about retiring when she did?
She knew there would be cases she wanted to be a part of, and there were some decisions that really disappointed her. I think, what was the big one on political contributions? I'm forgetting the name now.
Citizens United.
Citizens United, there we go. Yeah, she was really disappointed. She was very clear that she would have voted the other way on that one.
So how did she spend her time in retirement? What was her first move when she retired?
So as I said earlier tonight at the Jayhawk Club, Mom saw a 5-year horizon that people would have any interest in what she had to say, and had 2 initiatives she wanted to work on. One was trying to get more states to do merit selection of judges, and the other was to educate America about the importance that the judiciary be independent and not poached or pressured unreasonably by the political branches, that they needed to remain independent to protect our democracy and our 3-branch system of government. And as she tried to give shape to that, she realized that not only did people not understand the judiciary, that they lacked a civics education about the entire system. And she figured the most accessible demographic was young people in school when they were impressionable and were learning lots of things, and that she should design a program to reach middle school students who were old enough to begin to understand the concepts and young enough to be open to the ideas. And the real visionary idea she had was that the way to get them really interested in learning was to give them interactive role-playing games on the computer to teach the content. And she put together a brilliant team of people that contributed both the content, what is it we need to teach them, and how are we going to do it, how are we going to make it fun, how are we going to make it work, how can we allow the teacher in the classroom that's moderating all of this to understand each student's progress, and make it all come together. And we're fortunate tonight that Louise Dubé is here. She's the executive director of iCivics, has been for, it's over 10 years now, isn't it, Louise? She'll be able to tell you much more precisely how all of this has worked and how incredibly successful the program became.
Yeah. Look forward to hearing.
My brother went to Harvard Business School and has been in software as a service, and he's in Silicon Valley, and he knows when you've got a hit on your hands. That's his business to know. And he cracks up because Mom's project with iCivics outclasses most Silicon Valley software startups and entrepreneurs because of how successful it's been. And you need to know that unlike the Silicon Valley guys, she never took a dime from it. She'd have her travel, when she went to speak for iCivics, her travel costs would be covered. She never took any compensation for building that. She felt it was her obligation as a retired justice of the Supreme Court to uphold the dignity of her office by not getting paid for something she felt it was her obligation to do. How's that?
Yeah.
Does that sound unlike today?
We look forward to hearing more from Louise in just a few minutes. But when we were talking this afternoon, you mentioned that your mom had always focused on outreach and education, even from the beginning of her career. Or that she did a lot of
I would say on the court.
Yeah, on the court.
On the court. She was a novelty. First woman. Everybody wanted to see this person. What was she really like? How did she get it? How was she going to be different? Everybody wanted to meet Sandra Day O'Connor, especially in the legal community. So she decided that because of that singular opportunity and that she had the burden of being the first and the dread of being the last if she blew it, that she needed to go out and put the Supreme Court on display. This is what we do. This is how we work. This is how it's supposed to happen. And she went around the entire country. She, made it a plan to get to all 50 states as soon as she could, and then start and go through all 50 again, before she was discovered as an international sensation and began doing the same thing around the globe. But she was always in demand as a public speaker. In that same program that RBG was asked about Mom and their time together on the court, she'd say every day she got a request from somebody to come speak at their campus or dedicate their law school or their library, and it was always prefaced by, well, Justice O'Connor came, won't you?
That's some pressure.
She said it became a really hard act to follow.
A tough act to follow, indeed. I just have a couple more questions before we turn it over to the audience. You mentioned that she also was involved with democracy development in Eastern Europe as well.
Right. It was during her time on the court that the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. So the Soviet bloc states all were suddenly left to do what they were going to do. What should they do? A fellow that was my dad's law partner at a firm called Miller and Chevalier in Washington, D.C., had a lot of history with the American Bar Association, and he proposed to the ABA, and they accepted his idea of starting a program. And it was originally named CELI, the Central and Eastern European Legal Initiative. Years later, they switched it to the Rule of Law Initiative. But the idea was to get American lawyers to volunteer their time at no pay, 6-month stints in country, in these former Soviet satellites, to write new systems for their democracies. And not to try and cram the US system or the US way down their throats, but to work cooperatively with them and offer, what we found works well for us, and to kind of react to their ideas to try and figure this out. The most common challenge they encountered was that their counterparts couldn't imagine a world in which the judges weren't on the take and doing what their political masters told them to decide in every case. That was the hardest concept to explain that was even possible. So that's one of the reasons Mom was so concerned about protecting the independence of our judiciary from those kinds of attacks, whether they be all at once or chipping away around the edges till it eventually damaged the system.
This is going to be a hard one. If you were to choose just 2 or 3 words, characteristics that describe the leadership legacy of your mom, what would those be?
She was the quintessential American. She understood our country, what it could be. She was always trying to she respected its institutions and felt that it was our obligation to do what we could to make them function better, not to tear them apart.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. So let's turn it over. Our audiences always have some brilliant questions, so I look forward to hearing what those are. And we have 2 students with microphones who will come around and meet you with that microphone. You can ask the question up here in the front, Mia.
Did your mother feel any particular responsibility to represent women on the court?
She often said she was happy to be the first but didn't want to be the last. And every time another woman made it to the court, it was a cause for celebration. And then she would go on to say, "We'll be delighted when there are 9 of us." And she became, great friends with RBG, who joined first, even though they often found themselves, on opposing sides of cases. They were still very good friends. The last time I saw them together was at an iCivics event at the court, where RBG spoke and Tony Kennedy spoke and an iCivics instructor spoke. She had the best remarks in the whole evening. We were in the cocktail party before the dinner started in the big conference room at the court, and RBG arrived fashionably dressed and fashionably late. And she came in and I saw her and went and said hello, and she said, "Where's your mother?" And I said, "She's in the opposite corner over there." And she said, "Point her out." "Oh, there she is." And then Mom turned and saw her, and their eyes locked like laser beams. They rushed towards each other, and their eyes didn't go off each other's eyes until they were forced to go to dinner. It was this incredible connection they had, even though they were from different kind of orientations. They had such shared experience together as colleagues with such mutual respect. It was just wonderful to see.
Thank you. Next, other questions? I pumped him up. I said there were going to be some great questions, so I know there are some out there. I'll ask one in the meantime. Would your mom have described herself as a political moderate? Did she ever? Yeah, how did she
She'd
characterize her
probably
politics?
dodge that and say that she tried to decide each case on its own and get it right, and kind of the, end up at the, here lies a good judge tombstone, and then the other thing she would say is that, ideally a wise old man and a wise old woman would reach the same conclusion. Those were common statements from her.
Interesting.
She had a lot of that, Western, rural, kind of practical common sense going on.
Was she a fan of Barry Goldwater?
She was. She was. In that, he was the genuine article. And he was a huge fan of hers. He was in the twilight of his career in Mom and Dad's earliest years in Washington, and his wife Peggy had passed away. She had cancer and died. And there he was in Washington finishing out his Senate career. He couldn't run again. He was too old. And he was outlived his Washington buddies. And so he would show up at Mom and Dad's house, for a nightcap and stay too late.
To kick him out.
So, they ended up, it was like, when's Barry going to leave? But they were that close. And just recently, when we were tidying some stuff up in our storage room, Joni ran across some cool stuff. It was a Goldwater campaign banner that she had from 1964 that she had saved.
That's a good answer to that question. Any other questions? Yes.
She was,
Go ahead.
She was the Arizona co-chair of Nixon's re-election campaign in 1972. She was, was still, in elective politics herself, and that was the thing to do. Strange bedfellow.
All right, so we had a question here.
Do you have an idea and could describe one of her favorite iCivics activities?
Well, because iCivics evolved from ourcourts.org, that was the first game I ever played, and she was very proud of it. And in that, you're going to love this model. The student, creates their login, their username, and they're in the system. And in that game, I think it was called Supreme Decision? Yes. Is that what it was called?
We just redid it last year.
Love it. Anyway, so you've got a case. And, in the opening sequence, the case is described to the student, and the student is playing the role of a Supreme Court law clerk. And your justice is explaining the case to you and says, I'm not sure how I want to do this. Why not? And this isn't how it works in the real world, mind you. Please go visit the other 8 colleagues of mine and ask them what they think we should do. And so the role play sends you to the other chambers, and each justice has a completely different take on the case. You get a bunch of quiz questions trying to explain what that justice just shared and your thoughts on that, and you make your way all around and you get to the end and you have to explain to your justice, what should he do or she do? It's fabulous. It's a great learning exercise. I just found it immensely entertaining, and all the modules are equally fun.
Charlie.
Scott, thank you for being here today. Do you think Justice O'Connor, if she were still here, would be appalled at how far the image of the court has dropped? And if she were here, do you think she would try to have any influence on the justices to try to correct that?
I can only speculate, but I think from the Bush v. Gore experience, there might have been a few cases she would have urged her colleagues not to take. we didn't, there's some of those they didn't need to decide because they had already been decided in the lower courts. And the Supreme Court is the only court that gets to decide whether they're going to take an appeal or not. They choose their agenda. So, sometimes the right answer is no answer. Just let it die at the level it was. But she was disappearing into the fog of her Alzheimer's as the Donald Trump phenomenon appeared and the campaign went underway and he got elected. And I would talk to her from time to time about the latest, scandal, which seems small compared to, the more recent versions. And she was appalled by that. But 5 minutes after hearing it, it was forgotten. So we really don't know how strongly she would have felt or tried to act, if she were able. It's a terrible disease. Both of our parents suffered through it.
We had a question back here.
Hi, I think from hearing you talk, I think it's so clear the love and the deep respect that you had for your mom, and I think that's been so wonderful to hear. And so my question was, obviously the legal profession is not perfect and there's still a lot of barriers for women even today. So what advice do you think your mom would give incoming law students who are women and are trying to navigate, having families and having all these other responsibilities while also still facing a lot of the barriers that remain today?
She was proud to give her name to Arizona State University for its law school. It's the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. And like most law schools today, there are more women law students than men. So that's quite a bit of progress. And that suggests that society, accepts working women in professional roles and, working out that familial thing at home. If you choose to have children, our society has a lot more practice with that than when Mom first was trying that. In my era as a kid with a working mom, she was really good at recruiting the stay-at-home moms to drive us to after-school activities or pick us up at school, that kind of thing. She had a strong network of friends that she played tennis and golf with on the weekends that provided a lot of that help. And she did stop out of the workforce for about 2 or 3 years. And it was funny because during the years she wasn't working, she was president of the junior league and had 20 other activities, so I don't know whether that really saved her any time or not. She was the most energetic and organized person anyone who knew her had ever known. It was, those that kind of observed it up close, like her law clerks said, it was uncanny how she could focus to the exclusion of everything else while she was, say, drafting something. And then she could finish that and in a nanosecond be focused 100% on something completely different and just as attentive to that. Really amazing.
We have time for one more question if there's one.
I'll give you one more thing that people adored her for is when you were speaking to her, you were the only person on the planet. Total eye contact. She wasn't looking for somebody more interesting than you to go talk to, and stop listening to you. She was 100% focused. And like when she was in the state legislature, it might be some cowboy, that some government agency had, made life more difficult for in his ranching thing. And, she would, no matter how dirty he was coming in off the ranch, in his pickup truck and the, cow pie on his boot heel, she would give him her total focus and try and solve his problem. She was that way with everybody, no matter your station in life.
Please join me in thanking Scott for being here. At this time, I'd like to invite Louise DeBay up to the stage here. We can do our presentation of the award. It's my honor as director of the Dole Institute and on behalf of the Dole Institute and inspired by the leadership legacy of Senator Bob Dole to recognize U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor for her transformative leadership legacy that continues to educate and inspire millions of young people to become civically engaged through online civics education, thanks to the efforts of her visionary organization, iCivics. Scott, I'm honored to present this to you in honor of your late mother, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, the 2024 Dole Leadership Prize.
Thank you.
And for you, Louise, and iCivics, $25,000 from the Dole Institute of Politics in support of your fine work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I get the money.
You get one of those
get the
too.
blessing.
You get Thank you. And Louise, if you'd like to please let us know more about iCivics before we conclude.
Thank you, everybody. What a beautiful evening, and what a fantastic tribute to this woman. I started, as Scott mentioned, roughly 10 years ago, and I was asked to go down and interview with Sandra Day O'Connor. I am from Massachusetts, and I flew down to DC, and we sat down to dinner, and we ordered our food, and as soon as the food came, people started to come over and talk to her about their problems and their kids and how the judgment on the court recently and this and that, and then dessert came, and I never uttered a word. It was the easiest job interview ever, and somehow I got hired. I don't know why. But anyway, the idea for our courts and iCivics came 5 years earlier, as Scott mentioned. And Scott mentioned that beautiful game, Supreme Decision, but I'm going to mention a different one since we're so close to the election. If you do not like the candidates we have today, I suggest you go to iCivics.org and play Win the White House. You can run yourself as a candidate for the presidency, choose your own agenda, choose your state you want to go poll in, choose where you're going to fundraise, and then you will learn about the Electoral College, which you may know too much about by now. But anyway, Sandra Day O'Connor had these games, right, which was pretty amazing in itself, but she had no way to get them out to schools. So what does she do? She's a politician. She calls her friends. Who are these friends? They're women judges in all of the states. And she says to them, Sally, you have to go into the schools and you have to convince them to use these games, which is amazing that it worked at all. This is I will say, not the best idea, but fantastically, because of the quality of the people who had built the games and because of the quality of the idea, it worked. And so we've gone from 2 people in a basement at Georgetown to now 70 people in 25 states. We've gone, we're in all 50 states. We have done some analysis. We are now in 80% of counties in America, red, blue, purple, all over. And we're now 145,000 educators every year, 9 million students a year, and everything is free. We have added to the games. We have lesson plans. We have curriculum. We have homework helpers. We have all sorts of things. So just go to iCivics.org and sign up, and you can play all of this.
And 100% nonpartisan.
The most important thing, exactly, is that we are used in red places, blue places, purple places, all over. But I do want you to understand that we are not where we need to be. If you go and look at the scores for civics, nationally, the nation's report card for civics, it is one of the lowest. The only discipline that's worse is history. So we have been inching up to about 21% proficiency. It fell back during COVID, like all of them, at 20%. So that's pathetic, really. But you know, the reason why is that we don't take it seriously. We spend $50 per year per student on STEM education in this country, which is fantastic. We spend 50 cents per student per year on civics. So the difference is quite large. We have no time with the kids in the classroom. We have no accountability, we have no test, we have nothing. So that's why it's really hard to do. So Sandra Day O'Connor, before Alzheimer took her, was really active on the political scene. So she would travel to the National Governors Association meetings. She would go to the state legislators and advocate for civics. And so when in 2017 she retired from public life, we at iCivics decided that somebody has got to do this work. So we started doing state and federal advocacy for only bipartisan pro-civics policies. So we cannot work on anything that doesn't have bipartisan support, and we only do things that are good for civics. What are those things? More time in the classroom, more support for educators. That's it. So we now have 7 people that do this in 40 states, and we had a bill in Congress as well. So I want to leave you with this. It's really absolutely impossible to govern if people don't believe in the government and they don't believe in democracy. That's just impossible to do. Today, more than 50% of young people believe that we have either a failed democracy or a democracy that doesn't work. But you and I both know, if we know that at the core of our system are civic knowledge, civic skills, civic dispositions, we know that compromise is baked into our system, you can't take it away. If you know how the institutions are supposed to work, if you hold them accountable to work, the system works. We have to make a case for this country and for our institutions. And that, I think, is my message to all of you. Please support civics. There are many ways. You can go to civxnow.org. That's our organization's policy menu for all the states. You can look up Kansas or any other state and see what the policies are. You can sign up to advocate legislatively, or you can sign up to simply talk to your friends and tell them how important it is to invest in young people and invest in civics. With that, I want to thank the Dole Institute. This was a beautiful program. Thank you for your support. Thank you for this lovely conversation. Thank you from iCivics. This support is really important to us. Thank you to you, Audrey. Thank you to the board. And thank you to everyone who's part of the Dole Institute community. We are deeply, deeply grateful.
Thank you, Louise, for your inspiring words, your inspiring work. Thank you for sharing this inspiring legacy with us this evening. Okay, folks, we have 11 days to Election Day, so vote early. I would say vote early, but not often, just once. Come back next Tuesday morning. Those of you who are able to join us at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 29th, we're going to have our friends from the Bipartisan Policy Center come and talk to us about structural democracy, what things we can do to make Congress work better for the American people. And then on Wednesday, October 30th, at 4 p.m., we're going to have our friends Luke Messer, former representative from Indiana, Republican, and Sherry Bustos, former representative, U.S. representative from Illinois, Democrat, join us to talk more about their service and their relationship and how we can work practically in Congress. So look forward to seeing you again. We will see you very soon. Thank you for joining us this evening.